Georgetown University. The American Goethe Society is sponsoring tonight's talk by Luke Johnson in partnership with the Goethe Institute. And I'd just like to say at the outset how delighted I am, and all of us are, that we're able to partner with the Goethe Institute again. This is our second talk of the year at this new location, and hopefully the second of many more. And I think the talk tonight will provide a very fresh and invigorating perspective on some central questions of philosophy, politics, and aesthetics. So very happy to see some familiar faces and some new faces in the audience. And for those of you who may not be as familiar with American Goethe Society, I'd like just to say a couple of things about the organization. The American Goethe Society is not the Goethe Institute, although we partner with them for many of our events. It is an all-volunteer, nonprofit organization dedicated to fellowship and the appreciation of German literature, culture, music, art, and philosophy. So the Goethe Society is one of two surviving Goethe societies in North America. It was founded in 1931 in Baltimore by a group of German professors as an outgrowth of the original Goethe-Gesellschaft in Weimar, and has since continued to pursue its mission of promoting the appreciation of German language and culture in the DC area. So we support a variety of German-themed events throughout the year, including regular talks on themes related to German literature and culture. We have a drama reading group. We have poetry-themed lunches, our Lunches mit Lyrik, at local German restaurants. And we also have a yearly classical Oktoberfest, which features a speaker as well as a catered Oktoberfest banquet and a film. So that will be happening towards the end of October later this year. So most of our events are offered at free or offered at reduced cost to members, and we also help promote the study of the German language in the DC area by offering yearly Goethe prizes to outstanding high school students of German. So some of you were at our ceremony, which was just a few minutes ago, to honor the three Goethe Prize recipients. So thank you very much for joining us for that. So you don't have to be a German professor, you don't even really have to know German very, very well to become a member of AGS. The only thing you have to have is a curiosity and an interest in German literature and culture, in some or all aspects of it. So if you'd like to learn more about the group, please do stick around afterwards for our reception and talk to some of our members who are here this evening. We also have a website, www.americangoethesociety.org, which is updated regularly and has information about our history and our programs. Just speaking of the reception, again, our events are our talks are generally free. However, we do welcome small donations that you might be able to make. There's a lovely Krug in the bar area that you'll see when you join us for the reception. And I hope you will be able to join us for the reception. And of course, we're very grateful for any donations you might be able to give. So I'd like to just go ahead and introduce tonight's speaker. I'm very pleased to have here this evening Luke Johnson, who is a music producer, an app developer, and a philosophy PhD candidate at the University of Georgia. Go Dogs, I think.
Yeah.
And I believe you're...
Sick 'em.
He holds a master's degree from New York University, is that right?
NYU, yeah.
NYU.
Yeah.
So his forthcoming book is entitled Kierkegaard and the Significance of Individuality. His educational app, Noetic, aims to create an expansive audio lecture library on works of philosophy, and it aims to bring philosophy to a variety of audiences. And I think his talk this evening is geared to do just that.
Totally.
So Luke's talk this evening is titled Beauty and the Just State, The Contours of Schiller's On the Aesthetic Education of Man. And I think it's a response to the idea of sort of a bias that is held by many philosophers, which is that art that serves political ends or is connected to politics in some way is an anathema, and it dangerously approximates propaganda. However, I think Luke will show tonight that Schiller had a very deep interest in this nexus of art and politics and was untroubled by these kinds of biases and concerns. Schiller, Luke argues, surpasses Kant's ethical and aesthetic thought, which he greatly admired. So we've already established that Schiller is not anti-Kant. So he unites both in the 1794 1795 treatise on the aesthetic education of man, in which he also articulates his response to the French Revolution. Towards an adumbration of Schiller's aesthetic theory, the talk will explore the key questions of the aesthetic letters, as Luke has outlined them here. What is the psychological composition of man, psychological composition of the human? Why do we find humanity fractured, both mentally and politically? And can the perception of the beautiful negate our disintegration and just usher in the just state? So Luke will take over from here. We'll have a short discussion period afterwards. So any questions you have, any burning issues, you can address to him. And then, of course, there will be a reception in the lobby, which you're all welcome to join us for. So please welcome Luke Johnson.
Hey, guys. So I saw there were some late stragglers or whatever. Did everybody get a handout? Because, yeah, it might be pretty essential. So I'm doing something a little bit different than, well, really, I've ever done. Typically, philosophy lectures consist of individuals getting up behind a lectern and reading off a script, a teleprompter, and trying to convince you of a general point of view, kind of just going by rote, right? And I really wanted to get out of, for a multitude of reasons, I wanted to do sort of an extemporaneous exposition of Schiller's On the Aesthetic Education of Man. Now that may come back to bite me, because I'm looking out at this audience tonight, and I see some very well-dressed people who look like they know Schiller, maybe experts in it. I am not an expert in Schiller. I kind of just threw a dart. I was, like Mary Helen said, my background is in Kierkegaard and other German idealists, and I encountered Schiller as sort of a footnote to a lot of them. And I really wanted to break out of the myopic imprisonment that I had with Kierkegaard. I've been working on this book for like 2.5, 3 years. And I wanted to explore somebody else. And so I just kind of threw that dart with Schiller. Also, if you go and download the Noetic app, if you want something that's super rigorous, that misses no detail or whatever, on the app I have put together an analysis and summation of everything. And also with C.J. Eller, I've done like a 10-part discussion, 4 chapters at a time. I think it's like 9 hours of audio that you can go where we really break down Schiller in this text on every single issue. It might be even too painstakingly slow for you, but give me some feedback and let me know. Also, I'm really concerned about the state of philosophy. Philosophy, I believe, is receding. It's dying. And a lot of the reason for this is that the human personality of philosophers isn't really coming through the text. And I think we saw that with people like Socrates and whatnot. You really felt like the person was there. When I read the 5 dialogues when I was 19 years old, at the end of it, what did I do? I wept. Because I felt like I was contemporaneous with that individual. And if I just stood behind this lectern tonight and kind of tried to sound smart and was like a cuttlefish and put this ink out there and mystified you, I don't know if I would really connect with you and make you think that philosophy was a vital activity. So I'm going to get up here and try to do this off the top of my head. I'm going to mess up. The experts in here are going to call me on those flubs, but that's okay, because philosophy is not about being a god. It's about a process and a conversation and engaging with one another. And that should give the non-philosophers in the audience hope, because you don't have to have a credential to do this stuff. So enough of my sort of grandstanding. I'm going to say that. So I should give a little bit of context. I don't know if I can really improve upon what Mary Helen has already said, but many people think of Schiller, think of him as a philosopher kind of as an afterthought. He's better known as sort of a dramatist and a playwright and whatnot. I'm really only acquainted with this work. And I think there are going to be other people in this audience that can sort of talk about how he maybe sort of did some addendums and some add-ons to address some of the things that were lacking in the aesthetical letters. So we talked a little bit about the historical context. So you put this out in 1794, right? And when CJ and I were putting together the discussion of On the Aesthetic Education of Man, something that we found out is, and I don't mean to rake you over the coals here, but it involves me too, how woefully inadequate our historical understanding of European events was. Like, I kind of learned somewhere around the point what the French Revolution was about, but I knew Napoleon was in the mix there, and I knew some stuff had happened, but I didn't really know how to connect all those dots. But essentially, right, like the idea is that very well-intentioned, the French Revolution started with a lot of philosophical, rational social contract theory and ultimately culminated with an emperorship. How strange, right? Why did that happen? Right? And so we have Europe torn into a bloody mess, and like this. And ironically, I mean, I guess depending on what lens you look at it, Napoleon was somewhat successful at ushering in democratic revolution. But I mean, at what end? What means did he do to do that? So Schiller was profoundly preoccupied with how we bring about the just state, right? And it seemed that philosophy was inept. I mean, philosophy had already figured it all out. Kant had already come and gone, right? Kant had given us the political and ethical roadmap for how we get to this ultimate sort of governmental utopia. Now, I want to talk a little bit about that indebtedness to Kant, but it didn't work. If it had worked, why did so many people have to die? Why did tyranny prevail? Ought it not have just been automatic? Why didn't people naturally ascend to the moral? That didn't happen in Schiller's eyes. So he's got to find another mechanism. And what's that mechanism going to be for Schiller? Well, it's going to be art. And we'll talk about how that mechanism works, what kind of condition it precipitates, the nature of art. Are art objects beautiful, or does the beauty occur within us? But ultimately, what's so wonderful about this text, I imagine there are other artists in this audience. I'm an artist. CJ's an artist. There are others. Today, in our capitalist society, don't get me wrong, I'm not going to knock it entirely, art is not rewarded. I can't sell my music. No one will buy it. It is useless. It has no value. I cannot make a living off of that. So I want to try to make a living off of philosophy, because that seems like a good idea, right? Right? Painters. I'm sure you're selling paintings all the time. I'm sure there's a great appetite for that. I'm sure your play is getting published all over the place. It's not happening. And there are reasons for that, which we'll discuss. But if you are an artist, you probably feel disrespected by the society that you're in. And Schiller, I think people felt at that time that artists felt were disrespected as well. That what they were doing was frivolous. That it wasn't really contributing to the larger aims of the state. Like what good does a man of genius or exceptional spiritual aptitude do for a state? It's kind of narcissistic. It's kind of solipsistic in a way, right? But he's going to say, oh no, you are going to be absolutely essential for bringing in this just state, because all the other traditional means, bringing it in by force, bringing it in by philosophy, everything else has failed. So let's try art. Okay? So that should be, if you are an artist walking out of here tonight, you should feel really good about yourself. Okay, so the next point I want to talk about. So let's talk about Schiller's indebtedness to Kant. Early on in On the Aesthetic Education of Man, Schiller acknowledges that he is a disciple of Kant. Cool. Do we all know what that means? I thought I knew what that meant. I had no idea what that meant. And truthfully, I don't know if this book can be taught separately from studying the entire corpus of Kant. Like, I think you probably have to take 2 years of studying Kant intensely, the critique of pure reason, practical reason, his critique of judgment, and all of it. And then maybe you'll have a full-blown understanding of Schiller. That's the thing after studying this text, I was like, oh man, if I went back and did that Kant study, I'd probably have a totally different take on it. But let's talk about what it means to be a Kantian in some way. And the philosophy people out there are going to find this hopelessly simplistic, and that's okay. I'm not trying to give a lecture on Kant tonight, but let's just go through it real quick. So on an ethical level, what do we mean by Kant? Does anybody kind of understand what the primary principle of Kantian ethics is? Oh, I saw a head nod there. Well, it's 2 words. What's it called? Categorical imperative, right? There's 3 versions. Yeah. The kingdom of ends, But it's the categorical imperative, which some people some reduce to the golden rule, which not really, because that takes into consideration consequences. It's this idea that moral action is to be restricted if it can't be universalized into something that doesn't, that admits a contradiction. Let me say that again. Your moral action, if it cannot be universalized into a law for all rational agents and doesn't admit of a contradiction, then you can do it, right? But if it admits of a contradiction, then you ought not to do it. It's a very complicated way of saying the golden rule. So what does it mean to be a political Kantian, right? I didn't really know. I had to look it up. Ultimately, what Kant really wanted to do is he was a Republican. He ultimately wanted to get a sort of democratic republic. I think he lobbied early on for something that would approximate the League of Nations or the UN. I don't know for sure. That's my little research that I did. What does it mean for how Kant's relation of the mind to the world? Remarkably simplistic, if we could just sum it up in a sentence. Like, it's this idea, right, that we have sort of formal concepts and the reflective understanding that are fed sensuous material and go about creating a reality in an instance. This moment right now, you're making it. It's all in your head. The cool thing is you have intersubjective objectivity. So even though it's all reduced to your mind, we all share it on Kant's view. It's universal in that way. But it's shared amongst humans. Bumblebee reality is different from human reality. And dog reality is different from dog reality. But Kant's only concerned with the human perception of reality. So you make reality. It just happens so instantaneously you don't even know it. Your formal categories are applying it to sensual material. And then finally, Kant on the beautiful takes these same sort of gears of the mind, right? We find things that are beautiful that give our concepts problems. When so much sensuousness is presented to a concept that it's searching for a concept and yet can't be subsumed under it. And it gives us a sort of ecstasy of feeling the beautiful. Now, that's in distinction to the sublime. The sublime is a different part of Kant's aesthetical project. So for Kant and for Schiller, beauty happens in you. Paintings are not beautiful. It's in here that's beauty. So is reality, right? And this is going to be against sort of an empiricist sort of golden ratio. Well, if I just put this there, then that thing will be beautiful. No, so they're not going to be empirical rules for defining what is beautiful and what is not. It's going to be something that ultimately defies any sort of categorization that we could give it. So that's what it means for Schiller to be a Kantian, I suppose. Now, how faithfully he interprets Kant, I can't really say. Because I'm not a Kantian, I don't really know it. So if I was going to get up here and be an expert on it, I got to go back and read all that stuff. And I had to do a quick study to put this talk together. That's what I think it means to be indebted to Kant for Schiller. All right, so let's talk about some Schiller. Let's look at the first figure, this one. It's called Figure 1. Actually, it has a bigger title. Inevitable Evolution of the Mind from Ancient Greece to Modernity. Okay? It wasn't always so bad on Schiller's view. What's interesting, philosophers typically jettison religion. Typically say, oh, this whole Adam and Eve thing, nonsense. But guess what? There was an Edenic period in humanity. And for Schiller, it was with the Greeks. Okay? And for Schiller, what he thought is that there was universality amongst the early Greeks. Right? They easily fluctuated between their sensual, rational, and imaginative powers. So they would philosophize and then express things poetically and then engage in mathematics. They were Renaissance men. And there really wasn't any sort of difference. There wasn't the stratification amongst the different types of rational types or the sensual and the brutes or the intellectuals. Everybody was essentially the same. Apparently, this was Edenic, and it allowed them to be in a privileged state compared to us. Why Socrates was put to death by a majority rule, I don't know how that fits into this conception of history that Schiller has, but that's what he says. And to illustrate that, I have this dual bust, the sculpture of Aristophanes and Sophocles, where they're kind of one mind. That was a very helpful Google search right there. That really bailed me out. Okay? But it was inevitable. We can't blame it all on capitalism. There was an entropic sort of principle to the disintegration of the Greek and Edenic mind. Okay? Ultimately, it was going to fracture. And we're in a fractured state today, where we were a fractured state with the French Revolution. Ultimately, as a result of certain socioeconomic processes and whatnot, you're going to have individuals splinter. If they have a stronger proclivity towards sensuality, they become more married to their instincts, more married to the bestial aspect of themselves. If they're more intellectually inclined, they get more caught up in the formal or the rational part of themselves, right? So this creates a natural sort of antagonism amongst the barbarous and the oh-so-high-minded intellectual elites, right? So we got that problem in modernity. Does that still persist? Oh, yeah, it does. That's part of what I'm trying to do with the noetic thing. This app here, I talk to people about philosophy. I go out into public and stuff like that, and they look at me like I'm a hydra. That shouldn't be. I shouldn't be disrespected like that. No, I'm serious, and you shouldn't be either. So we have to figure out how to change that culture, and Schiller's going to think it's because of art. Now, the problem is not just that there's a bifurcation between those who fall along the more sensual and the rational aspects of mind, okay? The problem doesn't end just there. Guess what? Us intellectuals in this room, we're our own worst enemy. We hate each other. We hate ourselves. We're disconnected from the essential aspect of ourselves. We're disassociated from the imaginative part of ourselves. Look here. I put myself as a philosopher. But that could be you. We're doing philosophy right now. You're a philosopher. I'm not some icon for philosophy. So I'm inhabiting this little slice. Modernity has said, oh, you got to be good at something, Luke. You can't be a Renaissance man. Master, jack of all trades, master of none. You got to quit that music thing. You got to get good at philosophy. Okay, sure, society. I'll get good at something. It's the only other skill I got. Right? Or maybe you're good at physics. I mean, you're Neil deGrasse Tyson, and you get on all these shows, and everybody thinks you're a god, and then you go and you say philosophy is worthless. Well, I disagree with you, Neil deGrasse Tyson, and that's why I'm going to put you up here. You and I are going to fight. And there's someone like Dolly, more beholden to maybe the imaginative capacity that he has. Oh, and then there's Casanova, the Lothario, the Don Juan. All these individuals, they may possess some sort of greater intellectual ability, but they are alienated from one another. So they're not only alienated from people that are sensual, but they're alienated from other people that share their same sort of mental capacities because they're inhabiting only a small sliver of it. Does that make sense? I make graphs like comic books. I never was into comic books. I don't know why it happened. So, all right, that's figure one. So, why don't we just be moral? Why don't we just fix it? You know, like what? If we got Kant and we've got the roadmap, why can't we just turn into moral people? And Schiller's going to say that ultimately, because of all these, forces that make us split up and everything like that, we've been too hardened and coarsened. We're too ingrained in what we are. So if I got up here and I was like, the right way to be is to treat people as ends and means. If you're a Casanova or something like that, and you're convinced that's I'm not going to convince you. Think about political arguments. I used to care about politics. I used to be involved in them. I used to be like Rain Man about it. I used to know everything I could about statistics and arguments and dynamics and this and that. Guess how many people I ever convinced in my perspective? 0. No one ever agreed with me. We all want to believe our biases. And I think Schiller recognized that as well. So ultimately, if he's going to change people ethically, if he's going to get people internally coherent and good to one another, he's got to trick them. And the way he's going to trick them is through art. Okay? We cannot lecture people, but via the faculty of taste, we might be able to implant principles of the good there. So we have to talk about how that happens. What's interesting about this view, about getting the fractured elements of the mind together and getting the just state, what this is going to mean is that not all beautiful objects possess the same type of beauty. Okay? And we'll talk about that later. But you probably, if I'm like, think of something beautiful, probably 2/3 of you are wrong, at least on Schiller's view. It's not the right type of beauty. And the reason why it's not the right type of beauty is it doesn't really speak to the rational conception of man, and it doesn't usher in the just state. It may speak to some sort of episodic effusion of man's psychology, but it's not beautiful like you think it is. Like, I definitely want to think, like, I don't know, Miles Davis, anything he ever does is super beautiful. But that might not be the case on Schiller's view because it doesn't get us to the just state. So whether or not something is going to be justifiably beautiful is whether or not it accomplishes that end. Okay? But we'll get to that later. And the way that we do that, in order for us to understand the rational concept of beauty, we have to first understand the rational concept of man. Okay? And now that's going to involve going to the very imaginatively titled Figure 2. Okay? So what I'm going to talk about here is how Schiller believed it all worked. And then kind of compare it to what actuality actually is. That's not redundant? Of course it is. Okay. So, let's take a look at this. the anthropology of man for Schiller, okay, we talked about how his psychology is sort of divided up. He's going to divide man up into two fundamental things: person and condition. Okay? Person is probably just another name for what Freud called the ego, or some people have called the soul, or something like that. But person is going to be that unchangeable, unalterable, enduring element of ourselves that goes through every moment of our being, that is like a time slice that is supplanted by the next time slice. Okay? Your condition is that embodiment in time. And these things get married together. You might want to say to yourself, well, Luke, slow down. I'm not person and condition. I'm a person. No, you're not. Because guess what a person is on Schiller's view? Person is just empty capacity. If you were divorced from your condition, your bodily embodiment, in time or whatever, you'd be what he would call an empty infinity. You'd just be form. You have no material going through the sense apparatus to feed it so it can shape this reality that we're all experiencing right now. Okay? It'd just be all potentiality, an empty infinity. But if you were just, let's just say you were just conditioned, right? You would have no cognitive concepts at all. I don't know what ant reality is like, but I don't know if they have a person. Maybe they just kind of, or those bees that do the dance. I'm not sure they have categories. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. I don't know where consciousness begins and ends. Maybe cells have consciousness. I don't know. That's for another talk. I don't know. Maybe viruses have it. I don't know. So, there are these impulses. So the story goes. Because that's what a lot of philosophy is. I have to get up here and tell you a story about how things go. Is that from person comes the formal faculty, the formal impulse, where all these potentialities and forms and categories are. Like I mentioned earlier, this is the indebtedness to Kant's conception of the mind-world relationship. And then this sensual impulse, right, that feeds in all this material into those formal concepts. Okay? And that's how we get our reality. We take it for granted. It happens all the time. I'm pointing it out to you right now, and you might be like, mind blown, whatever. I think you've all seen The Matrix, so this concept shouldn't be that alien to you. Right? Everybody gets into philosophy. It's like, have you seen The Matrix? Yeah, I saw it when I was 20 years old. It's not interesting anymore. Okay? But you've seen The Matrix. This is what The Matrix is based on. Okay? What's interesting here, to get us out of those fragmented sort of divisions within modernity or whatever, Schiller has got to get individuals to break out of their excessive marriage to formality if they're more intellectually inclined, more sensually inclined, more bestial in nature. And the way he does this is that a new sort of impulse has to emerge. It's the play impulse that induces what is known as the aesthetic condition. Okay? And the play impulse happens when we encounter the rational concept of beauty, the properly beautiful object. All right? And it's going to be some sort of sign, symbol, art image, something like that. And what's going to happen here is that sort of what I talked about earlier with that Kantian view of there being too much sensuous material to fit underneath that concept. What it's going to do, I sort of imagine it, and it's really small here. It's going to kind of act like this reinforcing and negating sort of thing, where like a scale, where your ability to conceptualize reality is suspended. Because it's speaking so much to your sensual side and to your formal side, you can't quickly cognize it and make it into a reality. And when this happens, and I'm filling in some dots here, and there are probably going to be some Schiller people who are going to correct me all about this or whatever. What's happening here is when that happens, space, time, all our concepts and things like that kind of get messed up and warbly. Like, I don't know if you've ever gone to a really amazing symphonic performance or something like that. And it was 2 hours long, but it felt like it was 2 minutes long. Or if you fall in love with somebody and it's just this, you love their soul and you love their body, and like an hour feels like forever, or only like 5 minutes. It warps with our sense of time. We're taken to this sense of this place, this timeless place. And I think Schiller says that's where the magic happens. When we're sort of dreamily gazing at a photograph or a painting or something to that effect, and we're falling in love with it, when we have the sensual and formal aspects of ourselves offset, that this is when the real opportunity to bring about moral change happens. How? How does that happen? I don't know. I'm going to take a guess. But I think what Schiller is trying to tell us in that case is that we realize in that moment that we are the ones giving the concept to the reality. That we are the ones constructing the reality. So if I look at something on the wall or hear a piece of music or something like that, I feel my dignity going to work trying to conceptualize this rich sensuousness. At the same time, I feel alive. I have this overflowing of wonderful feeling. And it's in this moment that we feel our own dignity and connected with humanity in general. And I think it makes it easier for us to bestow human rights, rational concepts of freedom, and the just state. I think he thinks that's how art gets us to that place. Kind of a hop, skip, and a jump. But cool. That should work, right? That should happen all the time. But it doesn't. Let's descend back. Let's get down from the mountaintops and go back down to reality, to actuality again. We were talking about the ideal rational concept of beauty, rational concept of man. And what Schiller finds there, and I used to study biology many moons ago, so I remembered Punnett squares. And I sort of schematized it along that, is that the reality is individuals are at different spots in their lives at that moment, and they can shift and kind of go shoot, they can change and transform and all that stuff. This beautiful symbol, which Schiller labels either living form, or living shape or quiet form, depending on where you are in this schematization, it matters a little. It's just a semantic thing. It doesn't matter. This is what matters, okay? See if you can find yourself in this little schema that I came up with, okay? So he's going to say there are going to be individuals who are closer to the formal, and they're really tense. They're addicted to the formal. I tried to think of an example of that. Myself first came to mind. I'm telling you, doing this philosophy thing, get high off it all the time. Everything else is boring to me. But I used Professor Fink from The Simpsons. I don't know if you guys, The Simpsons are universal, right? You guys know The Simpsons? Professor Fink, all he can talk about is physics, right? That's all he's always interested in. They bring him to career day on The Simpsons, and he brings that little, to the kindergartners, he brings that little toy popper thing, and he won't let the children play with it because he has to explain the physics of it for them to really, truly enjoy it on the same level that he does, right? I see him as sort of what Schiller would call the tense, formal man. Below him, I kept with the Simpsons motif, chose Barney. Barney's the town drunk, right? Barney can't get away from booze. Briefly, he flirts with creating artistic film, right? And he sobers up for a little bit or something like that, right? But the addict, though more married to their sensuality, can't break that addiction. You take it away from them, they're just going to do anything they can to get it back. Okay? On the right side, I identified what I believe Schiller calls the relaxed, formal, or artificial man. And that might be an individual who is, I don't know, a lackadaisical philosophical daydreamer. I was probably like this more when I was in my youth. Maybe a poet more applies to this. And I tried to think of an example of this, and going with the earlier theme of Aristophanes and Socrates and all of that, I used Aristophanes' depiction of Socrates in his famous play The Clouds, which ultimately got Socrates condemned to death, of Socrates being this guy who lives in a basket and floats on clouds and is constantly just up in the philosophical ether. Right? He's just daydreaming. And then below that, I took an image from, as an example of the relaxed, sensual people. I took an example of some of the orgiastic scenes from Fellini's Satyricon. Anybody ever seen that movie? How did it make you feel after you saw it? Well, you don't have to answer that. I'll tell you how it made me feel. Nauseous. Too much. Too much bodies. Too much, you know? Too much sex. And, yeah, kind of tries to depict, it's kind of like does it happen in Greece or Rome? It's a famous movie. It was, yeah, it's too much. It's too much for me. Of course, I'm this geeky nerd here in the upper left quadrant. So the beautiful object, just to flesh out this account a little bit more, is going to have different effects depending on where you are in this square. So if you encounter Michelangelo's David, I'm taking that as in the canon, as an example of the rational concept of beauty that induces this dreamy timelessness that allows us to bestow the just state on everybody else. Like if I'm that dude, well, that's going to be melting beauty. That's going to relax me. When I encounter that, like everything's going to fall away and I'm going to be reconnected to my sensuality, and therefore I'm going to see the brotherhood of man. I'm going to experience melting beauty as living shape. Now, if I was the addict, if I was Barney, if I can't get away from booze, I would experience it as quiet form. It would elevate me to the formal dimension of things, right? And it would melt me in a different way. If I'm these casual hedonists in the bottom right quadrant, the form of Michelangelo's David actually might excite me, actually might make me more energized for the formal. Maybe. That might be a bad example, but maybe. And they would experience it as quiet form because they're sensual. And they need to be reconnected to the formal. And then Aristophanes, Socrates, he's already in the formal. He would experience this beautiful object as living form, and it would energize him. So, cool story, bro, right? It's a cool little story I told you. Let's test it out. Let's see if it's true. Let's kick the tires a little bit. Who knows? Let's see what happens. So let's turn to the nudes. Sex sells, right? See if we can get a lot of downloads of the app off nude people. All right, so I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to pick. See, when my conversations with CJ for the app, when we had our discussions about what might be an example of the rational concept of beauty, we couldn't get away from Michelangelo's David. And you know, if you can get over your attraction to David, or your unattraction, whatever the word is, repulsion, he's not repulsive, but let's just say it's not your thing. You can get over that. Maybe this is the rational concept of beauty. Now, maybe it may not seem like that right now. CJ and I just finished a course on Roland Barthes on photography called Camera Lucida. And one of the tests to know if you have a really good photograph is to put it down, walk away, and see what happens. So maybe you need to maybe this isn't the right place for a taste test. Let's just get it going, though. Maybe later you look at this, and you go to that timeless place, you feel your formal and your sensual faculties sort of energized, and you have that experience. Maybe, let me know. Get the app, go in the discussion section, let me know. Okay, let's just say that is the rational concept of beauty. What would be sort of offsetting other options? I chose here Rodin's The Old Woman, the Harlot. I don't know what she's called. She's got like 5 names. I saw this as probably more of a sensual depiction of art. It seems like the form is slipping away. The formal dimension is not as present as, say, in David. And maybe this, I don't know if we're supposed to find this beautiful or whatever, but I don't know if it does the same job as Michelangelo's David. I'm not making any claims, just we're doing a little thought experiment. And on the far right here, I don't even know if this is a good work of art. This is some Spartan soldier. He's really, looks like a wrestler. Maybe he's a wrestler. I mean, he looks like an action figure. He's super ripped, right? And maybe this is corresponds a little too much to our ideal conception, our formal conception of man. And maybe that's too formal, and Rodin is too sensual, and like Goldilocks, David is just right. I don't know. But that's how I sort of tested it out. And yeah, I think the part of me talking and lecturing at you is done. So now I have to, so I guess the question is now, what do you think about that? Does David take you to that place? What do you think about this story? Where are the holes in it? What do you need me to clarify? So there's probably a lot of questions. That lasted for 40 minutes. It's cool. It's cool. I didn't know how that was going to turn out. So do you want to just do Donahue-style interviews? Or?
Yeah, so I think we'll just start taking questions. I'm going to test this. Okay. Testing. Okay, so I think it works. So we'll start with you in the back.
Hi, my name is Michael Boars. I'm a graduate student at Catholic University in philosophy.
Oh, damn, you know your stuff. Good program.
On this particular topic, though, I don't know my stuff, which is actually the reason for my question. On the top of Figure 2, I was following the process as you described it until about the middle of the top. So I understood embodiment as having these two aspects of person and condition, and the sensual being connected with condition, and the formal being connected with the person. And I was wondering, and then I understood how when you experience the beautiful object, there's a kind of distortion of time, sometimes a freezing of time, sometimes a speeding up of time. But I didn't quite understand, you talked about some kind of imposition of form. There's the beautiful object out there, and somehow I'm imposing something, imposing a concept.
Yes.
I was wondering if you could clarify that for me.
Yeah, well, I think that would, to really clarify, what was your name again?
Michael.
Michael, I think for me to really clarify that, I'd have to do a serious review of Kant's critique of judgment, because it's not obvious to me like what constitutes a form and a concept for Kant. And I think Schiller is taking the audience, me, everyone else, for granted, being like, oh yeah, this is just out there in the intellectual ether. You know your Kant. It seems a little simplistic to me for the, like, if we use the Michelangelos David or whatever, that like we just have like this formal concept of man, and then we just apply it to something, and then it either sort of explodes that concept or it fits rather nicely to it, right? And I don't know if that's how Kant really thought about formal qualities. I don't know if he really got that specific with them. Can you maybe you're, if you don't know your Schiller, maybe you know your Kant, maybe you can speak a little bit more to that and maybe you can figure it out right now.
Yeah, well, I was thinking, for example, in a certain way, as a rational being, as a human being, you recognize that in some way the beautiful object, say Michelangelo's David, the beauty can only be appreciated by one of us rational beings.
Yes.
Yet the shape that Michelangelo's David has is something in reality. I mean, that's an objective limit to that lump of marble, really. But somehow the appreciation that such a shape means something can only come through our perceiving it.
Yes.
So
you're getting into a very, and I know you're talking about the critique of judgment, aren't you? Do you know? Because there are a handful of passages, if my memory serves correctly, and I studied it like 4 or 5 years ago. There are a couple passages where Kant says something that along the lines, and I think this is what you're getting at, that the human form is actually a symbol for morality, for the categorical imperative.
You mean the physical form of the human body?
I think he wanders into Kant really doesn't want to make art this. When I talk about like Schiller surpassing Kant, like there are some moments where Kant sort of entertains how beauty can make us moral or whatever, but he's not as big an advocate of it as Schiller. This is how Schiller is superseding Kant. But there are like a handful of passages where people try to piece it together and say he was making this case. But how much of that is part of the essential thrust of Kant's critique of judgment, I can't say. But I know that the human form being an embodiment of the ethical project is there, that they're somehow synonymous in some way. And were you hinting at that at all?
That's one of the things that I was thinking, and that somehow there's a meeting. You have to meet the sensual appearance of a thing with your own perception of order, which comes from you. Another thing, like a dog, might see the same statue and see the same physical outline of it, but it doesn't bring something to the experience which makes it beautiful. The dog will look at the statue and look at, a random lump of rocks, and it would be the same experience. But for the rational agent, there's something which we bring to it, and maybe that's what Schiller's thinking of the imposition.
But it might be the case, if beauty is this sort of conceptual gear grinding or whatever, it might be the case that there is dog beauty. It just might be a statue of a dog. I don't know.
So maybe we could collect a couple more questions.
Sure.
We've Jonathan Skolnick, and then
Thanks so much for your talk.
Thank you.
You talked about the art experience as timeless and related it to music and to love, which seem like things that are also actually maybe are all about time. But then you also talked about the historical setting of Schiller's letters and how they're responding to the French Revolution. It's often said about these that he's not just responding to Napoleon, but specifically to the terror and to the guillotine. So I was wondering if maybe you could speak to that, and especially the idea of sort of how it's rooted in a certain time, or in what ways the ideas of art and timelessness are there.
Whoosh. Not a historian. I mean, all I can really say is that I think that he wants that experience of timelessness to calm the passions down, to calm that fervor for that bloodlust to upheave the political regime or whatever, to calm it down a good bit. That there's something that at least will pump the brakes in the experience of the beautiful, that we won't just go around guillotining everybody, and that we won't be going and sort of launching into imperialistic wars. So I don't know. I mean, if you're having an experience of timelessness, it might remove you from that rage for class reprisal or for whatever happened in some previous conflict. But I don't know if that's going to be a satisfactory answer. I mean, you've got this very complex metaphysical question with this very real historical reality. I think he wants to take people out of that condition for a little while and get us all on the same page. I think he wants to cool things down a little bit.
I mean, maybe I could also
yes,
add
please.
Quick historical note. I mean, I think many of people in this room have seen the film Die geliebten Schwestern, so the Beloved Sisters, which is a sort of semi-fictionalized depiction of Schiller's life. And one of the things I think that a point that movie makes really effectively is that for Schiller, this project, the aesthetic letters, is really, and his opposition to the French Revolution is really rooted in his own personal experience, being at the court of Weimar, being deeply emotionally involved with, and in some instances having romantic relationships with members of the aristocracy. So you actually see, you hear the news coming from France, and then you see, one after the other, all of these aristocrats that he was, deeply involved with. And I think at the same time, he also has this very, he's part of this, in a way, sort of miniature, and of course it's not really a just state, but it's a, sort of miniature Edenic kind of atmosphere at the sort of Musenhof, like the sort of court of the muses in Weimar, where he and Goethe are in some sense able to realize some of these ideas on a very, very small scale, and they kind of have to turn a blind eye to the rest of the world in order to do that. So so I think there's some of that in the letters as well. That would be my take on it. But I think there's a question here, and then
I'd be curious to know whether anyone has applied Schiller's theories to his plays, especially the plays that he wrote before he wrote on the aesthetic education of man. So I'm thinking of something like Die Räuber, and I'd be curious to know how consistent that is, or.
Yeah, that's a Mary Helen question again.
I have
only
to
know
take
this
that
one
one?
book. Yeah, go.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot done. I mean, of course, this is much later than Die Räuber. So the Robbers is, of course, the play where, it depicts, murder, father murder, there's rape, there's pillage. I mean, it's this terribly violent play. And when it premiered in Mannheim in the 1780s, people were fainting and screaming in the aisles, and so it was a real scandal, right? But I think this is a very different Schiller from the Schiller of that you're dealing with the 1794-95 Schiller.
What happened after that?
What happened after that?
Yeah, what kind of stuff was he writing after this?
A bunch of really great plays. Yeah, Wallenstein.
Do they embody
Maria
any of these
Stuart.
ideas that we were?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so
absolutely, especially Maria Stuart.
How do you?
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Oh God, yeah.
It's hard, right?
How long do we have? But
it's up to you. You're the president.
It's your night. So I think I'm going to actually keep the microphone moving. I believe Noelle had a question, and then this gentleman back here.
Thank you. That was great.
Awesome. Thanks.
So I'm on figure 2, and I understood what you were saying about how different types of people experience this, experience art or experience this timelessness differently. I didn't understand what the difference is between living form and quiet form, or melting versus energizing? If you could just explain that,
Sure.
maybe.
So essentially, all right, living shape and quiet form are opposite sides of the same coin, right? Like, it's really going to be where you are in this square, right, is going to be predicated on whether or not you experience the symbol of beauty as living shape or quiet form, right? So
What's the example of a quiet form?
Well, so it depends on you. So, like, let's just say Michelangelo's David is both. He is an example of living shape and quiet form. It's just that to the let me check my chart, to the tense person, yes, no, to the sensual person, I'm sorry. To the sensual person, it's quiet form. To the formal person, it's living shape. The formal, artificial person needs to be reconnected to their sensuality. So they're going from concept to sensuality. But the sensual person is going from sensuality to form or to concept. So for them, it's going to be quiet form. All right? And the reason why there's these rays, the reason why they experience the rational concept of beauty differently is based on their tenseness or their relaxedness. Is that a word? Their indolence or something like that. So the addict and the hyper-obsessed professor, right, like, they need to be chilled the F out. They need that beautiful Klonopin, right, which is Michelangelo's David. They need to relax. So that's why beauty melts them, even though the tense professor experiences it as living shape and the addict experiences it as quiet form. All right, now our lackadaisical, philosophical daydreamer poet person, right, like, they're just staring at their belly button all day long, right, doing nothing, contributing nothing to society, because that's what they think of us, right? So they need to get their act together. They need to get a real job, and they need to have this beauty energize them. Same thing with the people just constantly engaging in the orgies. Come on, that's got to run out at some point. You're going to hate yourself, you know?
Okay, on that note, I think there's a comment from the back, and then two more.
That makes sense? Yeah? Okay.
Yeah, hi, this is great. And since you're a Kierkegaard, well, you've been studying Kierkegaard, I can't help. I mean, it's all over the place here.
Yeah, isn't it?
Not
it's
because
amazing.
of you. It's because of Schiller, but it's all over the place here. So, like, I'm just looking at, like, aesthetic. Okay, so all these types here are all in the aesthetic sphere. They're all distracted from their true self and the power that set them
Have you been
going.
listening to our conversations on the app? That's precisely, we had a whole conversation about that.
Right.
Yeah.
So they're all distracted from their true self and their true.
They're either
force.
caught up in objective thought, the body, their booze, whatever else. Kierkegaard has a stage theory. Individuals are in the aesthetic stage, the ethical stage, and the religious stage of existence broadly. And these would be what I consider to be up and down the totem pole of the aesthetic.
Yes, and then when there's this arrow in Figure 2 leading to the just state, which this arrow, these people are never going to get to this, as far as I can tell from reading Schiller.
He's got to try. He's got to try.
Well, they're all, whatever, they'll have this experience of whatever the play, you know, the play drive and so forth. But for Kierkegaard, you have to get to the point of a choice of the either or. There is good, or your choice. The choice you make is going to be good or not good. Whereas these people are form, sensual. I don't see anything about ethics in any of this, and any of their thing. And then, but then there's a weird connection to the religious sphere. Once the play drive comes in, I could see some weird connection of jumping beyond the moral, and never even going through the moral, possibly, with Schiller's pietist background and so forth. The feeling is the connection to God. So somehow, when you get into this play mode, that could be God.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah,
I don't know.
Like, dude, you're like me. I mean, the thing is, like, and Jordan and CJ, who I have built the Noetic app with, they'll attest to this. Anytime that it doesn't matter who we're studying, Augustine, Simone de Beauvoir, Schiller, Kierkegaard, whoever. To me, I don't see how you get God out of the picture. But what's interesting is that Schiller doesn't make any sort of faith claims in this book. In fact, he does say a little something that may fuel what will become sort of, that Hegel may cherry pick a little bit. He talks about in this book that the idea of there being this like sky daddy, as I like to call God, this sky daddy, that actually might be a relic from when people were more externally determined by their situations. But now we're entering into a stage where we can self-determine our ethics and stuff like that. And we ought to cast that off. And you can see how maybe that fed into Hegel's philosophy of religion and concepts of history, and how different religions may serve their point, and then they have to be jettisoned and cast off. But I don't know, there are a lot of differing interpretations of Hegel. Some people view him as the Thomas Aquinas of Protestantism, and other people view him as an atheist and proto-Marxist. So there isn't consensus on this idea of what Hegel and Schiller thought of God. So it's a really tricky territory, actually. So, but great. I love the fact that you picked up on the Kierkegaard stuff. I think it's all over the place, too. Yeah. Hey, man.
Hey, I appreciate the vision you have for philosophy, but
Thanks,
in
buddy.
Kant's groundwork, for instance, there's a radical separation between the categorical imperative of freedom, the free person, and the mechanistic universe of sensuality. And to the extent that the human person is primarily defined in terms of his freedom, his rationality, and there's this dichotomy, this division, this splitting, this schizophrenia, in a sense, that Hegel will work with, try to unify the self, but and unify through a historical process. But so with Schiller, there is a sense that the sensuality is an essential aspect of human existence that needs to be unified, and beauty is...
Yeah, it's not to be eschewed. It's not to be downplayed. We're not supposed to be ascetics. Well, did I answer your question already? Or was there more to it?
Yeah, no, I was just wanted to emphasize that point.
Yeah, I'm glad you did. I just wanted to affirm you. You're correct. Yeah.
If you or Schiller were walking down the street of St. Augustine, Florida, and all of a sudden you see, an exact replica of Michelangelo's David in front of a hotel, what are you or Schiller going to think about that?
We actually, when CJ and Jordan and I sort of rode in together from the countryside today, we were listening to the new Radiohead single, and I had a similar sort of conversation about imitations, and we were talking about it in regards to the flatness of MP3s and the immersiveness of the actual thing, the WAV file or whatever. That's getting into music files. But yeah, you swap it out. Man. I mean, the context would give it away, right? Like if I'm in St. Augustine, Florida, I know David's not supposed to be there. David doesn't travel, right? Like I know it's not. So, see, and this is the problem I have with a little bit of this account, right? So if I go, like I might let, if I see a replica in St. Augustine, Florida, like I'm going to know it's fake, and I'm probably not going to devote very much attention to it. The question is, if I tried hard enough, could I have the experience? And that's a big question. I don't know if I know the answer to it. I would say probably I would just keep walking. I probably wouldn't notice it very much. But then there's an interesting question with these other, works of sculpture, right? Like, maybe on the face of it, without much background story, like, maybe you tell me an interesting enough story about Rodin's Harlot. And maybe as I learn more about the context, it becomes more beautiful to me and puts me in that condition. And like, so what's the deal? Like, what happens when I get further information? Or like this Spartan figure. Like, I don't know who did this. I just ripped it off the internet. Like, it's kind of an example. Well, what if someone tells me, oh, Luke, no, that's actually a serious work of art by someone very famous. Take it seriously. And there's a whole backstory. This is from a famous battle, and he killed somebody important. Like, I can't answer your question, but what I'm trying to say here is a possible critique of Schiller is that context may matter to our perception of the beautiful, and the more we learn or unlearn about the thing, may allow us to have that experience of the aesthetic condition. But I don't think that's how he views beautiful objects. They're supposed to just sort of strike us and set us in motion. We're not supposed to be told these stories that then further make it more dreamy and beautiful, you know? But I don't know. I think it's a good critique, what you're saying. I just don't have the answer. I think it might hint at the incompleteness of it.
Okay, I see 3 more hands up. I want to have a little time for the reception after, but I'll go ahead and start with. So maybe we could do questions one after the other, and then you can respond.
Okay, I just want to dig in a little further what you raised. It seems like the whole process and this aesthetic condition is like finding an internal equilibrium between the formal and the sensual.
Internal what?
Equilibrium between the formal
yes.
and the sensual. But there is no concept of how it can evolve or change. And putting that aside, even for a moment, what comes out of it is this Zen moment of energizing beauty, which could lead to an action. There is nothing of why that should have positive connotation in terms of ethics, or how the channel and the extra steps are to go to the just state. How would you even aggregate these individual equilibriums of enlightenment where the formal meets the sensual into something that could be perceived as a just state? So it's a very in my view, it sounds a little bit limiting individual equilibrium finding, but that I cannot see the leap to anything else beyond it.
It does seem a little bit like a miracle, right? It does seem a little miraculous. Then a miracle happens.
No, but also I think what's important is, and I don't think we should remove completely from the concept of ethics of what to do with this wonderful state that we've achieved. Is it then the concept of changing? This equilibrium must probably change. Does our formal self can evolve and expand or diminish the possible equilibria that we could meet our sensual self? How they definitely are not static.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. Like, how long does it last for? Like, what sort of change does it have? I think the thing is like when we do have these encounters of beauty, it's really hard to go back to something that debases ourselves, right? Like, so if we have this super wonderful encounter with something beautiful, like, I mean, how are we going to go back to subjugating people? How are we going to go back to being alienated from the common man, right? Or how are we going to be alienated from one another? And I don't know if what he says is true. You know, where we find out that we impose this form, we have this feeling of liveliness. I don't know. But just search internally. Like when you have an experience of something beautiful, do you feel like a better person?
Yeah, but I can feel like a better person. But that means absolutely nothing that what I'm experiencing as beautiful is genuinely beautiful or good.
It doesn't matter.
You're making this example of once we see beauty, how can we go back to subjugating other people? Maybe I see beauty in subjugating other people.
Nah, no. I'm just trying to defend Schiller. It's not me. It's him. Yeah, but I understand your point, right? Because there are a lot of fascists that loved art, right? Didn't a lot of Nazis have great art collections? So why were they still out there subjugating people?
So I think the sensual is possibly very dark and very difficult, and where it meets the formal, there's something very questionable and messy.
I know. I don't disagree with you. It is complicated, and that is probably another a super valid critique.
It's not a question. I just wanted to make a comment to your question. And you said if you saw Michelangelo in San Augustine, you would just walk by. But what about the person who has no idea that there's another Michelangelos David? And so would they have the same feelings that somebody who sees the real one does? You don't have to talk.
They probably would. They probably would. Like if someone if Mork, just came down to earth or whatever, and presumably his faculties are the same as ours, he would have the same sort of experience. I guess the question, when CJ and I put... Yeah, and when CJ and I put together the seminar for this, and we really wrestle over a lot of these questions, I think you have to really ask yourself, does it matter? Does it matter if I think it's, that's... Right. I guess the question is it's just going to be a good thing. I think the thing that we can say is, like, just to tie it back together with what I said earlier, this is probably a clarion call. If we do believe that art can make us better people, that art should be everywhere. That it should be in the streets of St. Augustine, Florida. It's almost like there should be, like, it should be almost inescapable, and that maybe collectively it would add up to us being more magnanimous towards our other human beings. But whether or not they're imitations or copies, I don't know. I mean, the beauty is ultimately in you. It's not in the thing.
Intersubjective objectivity, I guess, that you were talking about before, that maybe we each view beauty differently, but this thing going on in our minds, maybe that's what's shared among all of us.
Yeah,
but I guess my question, though, is I'm curious whether Schiller would think that political art, not in the sense that Schiller's describing it as in, like, oh, art can lead us to the just state, but just stuff like protest songs and stuff like that. What would he think of that? Would that be too formal? Or does it really just take the context? Because maybe you could look at Schiller's, what is it, Ode to Joy? He wrote that, right? Ode to Joy? Yeah. Right, he wrote the words, right, so you could say that poem by itself, like, oh, brotherhood, cool, that's lovely. But then take it in the context of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, you're like, oh my God, that makes perfect sense. Let's form the just state now. Curious about that.
Well, CJ, you know the answer to this because you did the course with me. But I mean, if you'll recall, the art piece can't be too educative and didactic, right? Like, if it's going to be educative and didactic, it's going to speak too much to the formal side of man. It's going to neglect the sensual. And I was in Athens, Georgia, and everybody plays guitar, and they're like, "I want to change the world." Like, they got their Woody Guthrie picture about this machine kills fascists and all that stuff. And yet they're still asking themselves, why is art so impotent? Like, I'm writing all these protest songs. Why isn't it effective? And I think it's because it's too preachy. It's like, in order to transmogrify people, you kind of have to catch them off guard in a way.
I mean, I think actually it's interesting that you bring that up, because I actually gave a talk on the reception of Schiller last year as part of the American Goethe Society series. And one thing that you find out very quickly when you read about the history of Schiller's reception, which includes, of course, like things like the musical settings, like the Ode to Joy, is that Schiller has been used for every conceivable political agenda, from communism to socialism to democracy to fascism. I mean, everything really. I mean, his work seems to lend itself extraordinarily well to that kind of reading. But then I think you're absolutely right that he's trying to get away from this sort of Tendenz-Literatur, like tendential, didactic type literature. So I think we have time for maybe one more question. I think I saw a hand over here.
Thank you. You talked about that art is in the eye of the beholder. Something like this, and I think behind that concept is that we are not a tabula rasa. So we are not a tabula rasa, so there's always something already, standards of perception.
Yes.
That's not true. Because if we are born into a specific society with specific ways of perception, so we are automatically fed with specific standards of perception.
Yeah, Schiller says in On the Aesthetic Education of Man that he's going to say they're with us from birth, but he doesn't know how we got them.
Yeah.
He doesn't know how we got these formal capacities.
Right.
Like, he doesn't know how they're evolutionary
there are some
transmitted.
assumptions. There are some assumptions, and so in the end, his whole concept is within the concept of socialization of a person, and he doesn't question it. In his mind.
Yeah, and I think that's a larger sort of question for the Kantian project. And this is where it's really hard, is try because we're all sitting here talking like we know what forms and concepts are, but I'm really not sure that we do. And I think, if the form of man is like that, I could see that being something as a result of socialization. Whereas, like, maybe contours and solidity and other qualities like that might be something as a result of evolutionary transmission. Those qualities might, we have this separation of things that are hardwired and things that are sort of blended into us. And there's a lot of people that have done work on this. I remember like my undergraduate education, like I studied Bergson at some point, and he said like snakes were sort of evolutionary like programmed into us. That's why we all freak out at them when we see them for some inexplicable reason and why they're in Bibles and stuff like that. I don't know. I don't know which parts are the socialization and which parts are the ones that sort of naturally evolve as a result of our cognitive apparatus. That is a huge question. You've just... Yeah, most definitely.
Okay. Well, I think there are a number of hands up, but I think I'm going to go ahead and invite everyone to join us in the lobby for the reception and thank Luke for a wonderful talk. So I think we've traversed some very deep waters, and of course we can continue the discussion during the reception. So thank you very much.
Thanks for coming out, guys, and thank you to the American Goethe Society and the Goethe Institute for having me.